Today you are going to hear the testimony of Nadia Al-Hadi. To everyone, she was the obedient daughter of a respected Muslim leader, part of an honored family. But behind the high walls of her home, she lived imprisoned in silence and fear. The breaking point came on the day her own father told her, "Now you will be my wife." Nadia's world collapsed, and yet it was in that desert of pain that something impossible began to bloom. The answer came from an unlikely place: the internet. A video of Charlie Kirk, which she should never have watched, became the spark that ignited dangerous questions and unexpected prayers that led to a supernatural encounter, a miracle, and a final battle against her family that would change everything. And to begin, make sure you are already subscribed here to the channel. Leave your like and write in the comments from which city or country you are watching us, because stories like this prove that no one is ever too far to be reached by grace.
My name is Nadia Al-Hadi, and today I am 31 years old. But for you to truly understand who I am and how I arrived here, I need to open the doors of a past that seems to have been drawn in sand and silence. I grew up in a walled compound in the heart of a small town surrounded by the desert. High walls, iron gates always locked, guards at the entrance, policemen who passed by the street and never dared to oppose my father. He was Sheikh Farid, a man whose presence made any conversation fall silent. When he entered the sacred space of the mosque, even the elders would rise in reverence. What he said was law for those outside. But for us, inside the house, it was much more than that. His voice was like a sentence that no one dared to question. I grew up in this environment where every detail breathed order, rigidity, and fear. From a very young age, I learned to keep my head down, my eyes always fixed on the ground, never looking directly at a man. My body obeyed as if it were natural. But inside me there was always a restlessness I did not understand. It was as if something within my chest asked whether life was only this: silence, obedience, and invisibility. I knew all the prayers by heart, every gesture of the rituals, and I moved with the discipline of one who was born, programmed to serve. I took care of the house of my father's second wife, who was younger and still insecure with the tasks. I organized visits, received the guests, prepared the tea, arranged the cushions, checked if the incense burned slowly to perfume the air. There were always visits in the compound. Respected men came to hear my father. Women came seeking counsel, and our house seemed to revolve around this image of blessing and holiness. I, however, always remained in the background. I prepared trays of tea, adjusted my stepmother's veil before she entered the room, and when the meal was served, I waited until everyone had eaten to then nibble on what was left. Many times, I went to bed hungry, but that was not considered suffering. It was simply the natural order of things. The most painful, however, was not the hunger for bread, but the hunger to be seen. I was called the exemplary daughter, the obedient one, the one who caused no trouble, the one who molded herself without resistance. And yet, inside me, when night came and I climbed to the rooftop in secret, I felt an immense loneliness. I remember looking at the sky sprinkled with stars and whispering so low that only I could hear, "Do you see me? Do you care? Or do you only count how many times I fail in the rules?" The answer was always the cold silence of the stars. That emptiness became part of me. In that culture, the destiny of a daughter was to be given in marriage. The better the husband, the greater the honor for the family. I believed in my naivety that perhaps my father kept me because he loved me, because he thought I was not ready yet. I nurtured this illusion, like someone holding a small flame against the wind. Today, I know that it was not care. It was only part of something much darker. The atmosphere of my childhood still lives in my memory. The desert dust that slipped through the cracks, the strong smell of burning wood incense in the corners, the stifling corridors of the house where silence was the safest protection. Each cup of tea I served felt heavier than it really was. Each look of admiration cast upon my father reminded me that there I was invisible. The compound where we lived was not a home. It was a fortress, on the outside respected, on the inside suffocating. It was in this setting that my life unfolded until the day everything collapsed at once. It was an ordinary night, after the prayer of Isha. I was called to my father's office. I walked with my eyes fixed on the ground, as I had learned since childhood. Upon entering, he called me by name in a soft tone, and that confused me, for it was not his custom to speak like that. Sitting before him, I heard words that froze my body. Nadia, you have always been obedient, faithful, and pure. I have chosen you. You will be my wife. I felt as if the ground had disappeared. I repeated in a whisper, your wife? He smiled as one who announces something beautiful and sacred. He used religious passages to justify it, said that the prophet had special permissions, and that, as a spiritual leader, he had them too. He affirmed that it was an honor, that before Allah I would have more dignity than any other woman. But I could hear nothing beyond the buzzing in my ears. My vision grew blurry, my legs trembled. The man I always called Baba suddenly presented himself as my husband. That night, I was taken to a room prepared with almost ceremonial ritual. The cushions were aligned, the sheets stretched. 2 cups of steaming tea rested on the table beside dates arranged in perfection. The smell of incense filled the air in a suffocating way. Every detail screamed that there was no turning back. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, "This is wrong. You are my father." But I could not pronounce a word. Only one plea escaped my lips. "Baba, please." He frowned and answered coldly, "Do not call me that anymore. Today, I am your husband." The shock was so great that I felt as if my soul had split apart, and as if the pain inside the house were not enough. Days later, he made a point of exposing me in public. At a gathering with relatives, he asked me to serve tea. I obeyed, as always. When I placed the cup in his hands, I heard his clear and firm voice before everyone. "This is my beloved wife, who serves me with excellence." The silence that followed was unbearable. Some looked down, others turned their eyes away. No one said anything. That collective silence hurt more than any scream, because it showed me that everyone knew and none had the courage to confront. That night, I closed the door of my room and collapsed on the floor. The weight of the words, the public humiliation, the smell of incense still clinging to my clothes, everything crushed me. For the first time, I did not recite memorized prayers. I did not follow learned rituals. I only cried, with my face against the cold floor, and said in desperation, "If there is a God who sees me, then take me out of here, or take me away once and for all." Silence was the only answer I received, but inside me something had broken, and it was exactly from that night that my life entered an even denser darkness, but also a path I could never have imagined. That night, after having cried out with all my soul in silence, I closed my eyes without strength. I did not expect any answer. I had no hope of hearing anything. I just wanted to stop feeling the unbearable weight crushing me inside. And then, I fell asleep. But it was not an ordinary sleep. It was like crossing an invisible door into another place. Suddenly, I was in an endless desert. The ground was of pale sand, cold and infinite, and above me there was no sun, only a silver light spreading across the sky like a mantle. The wind did not blow. The air seemed suspended, as if time itself had stopped. I looked at myself and saw my torn abaya, dirty, caught at my ankles. I was barefoot. Every grain of sand seemed to hold my feet, as if it wanted to stop me from moving forward. At first, I felt fear. The silence of the desert was not like the silence of my house. Inside there, the silence was suffocating, heavy, full of judging eyes. But in that desert, the silence was different. It was as if the entire universe was on hold, ready to reveal something to me. And it was at that moment that I saw him. He was walking from far away, with firm, steady, secure steps. With each movement, the sand did not rise in dust, but seemed to open to let him pass. He was dressed in white, but it was not an ordinary white. It was a living, pulsating white, as if the very light had woven that garment. The brightness did not come from above. It came from him. My heart raced in my chest. I did not know who he was, but I could not take my eyes off him. When he came closer, I felt something I had never experienced. Throughout my life, I had always been looked at as the obedient daughter, as a servant, as someone who needed to erase herself to bring honor. I had always been seen as an extension of my father's power, never as myself. But that gaze was different. He saw me, Not as possession, not as an object, not as a shadow. He saw me whole, as if he knew every tear I had never dared to shed, every word I had swallowed, every night I had whispered to the sky without receiving an answer. He did not say many words, but the ones he said marked my soul like fire burning in the cold sand. His voice was not loud, but it was firm, gentle, and at the same time full of authority. He said, "You are not possession. You are mine. I have always seen you." At that instant, my legs gave way. I fell to my knees on the sand and cried as I had never cried before. I cried not only from pain, but from relief. It was as if the tears tore away the chains that had been bound inside me for years. Each word of his passed through my body like warmth. It was not a physical warmth. It was as if life itself was entering me, as if the death I carried inside was being expelled. I did not know how long I stayed there. I only know that I felt small, but at the same time held. He did not treat me with disdain. He did not demand blind obedience. He did not speak of honor or submission. He only saw me, and that was everything I had ever wanted, to truly be seen. Suddenly I woke up. I was back in my room, the same yellow lamp casting a circle of light over the worn-out rug. Everything around me looked the same, but inside me it was not. Something had changed. In the midst of the pain, a seed had been planted, a seed of peace I could not explain. There was no answer to my plea from the night before, but there was a sign. I did not know who that man in white was, but I knew he saw me, and that was enough to keep me alive for one more day. In the days that followed, I tried to keep this experience only to myself. What I had seen seemed impossible to tell anyone. How could I speak of a man in white walking in the desert and telling me words no man had ever said? I would be considered crazy, or worse, cursed. So I kept it in silence. But inside me, the echo of his words continued. "You are not possession. You are mine. I have always seen you." It was then that something unexpected happened. While helping my stepmother organize some cabinets, I found an old cell phone, forgotten among fabrics and boxes of scarves. My heart raced. To have a device like that in my hands was dangerous, but curiosity was stronger. I hid it in my clothes and took it to my room. That night, locked in, afraid of being discovered, I turned on the cell phone. To my surprise, it still worked. My hands trembled as I typed into the search bar the words that burned in my mind. Dream with man in white. What I found left me breathless. Stories from different places appeared. Syria, Iran, Egypt, Lebanon. People described encounters in dreams with a man in white. Some said he spoke words similar to those I had heard. Others said he comforted them, that he brought a presence of peace. And in many of those stories, there was a name I was not used to hearing in that way. Jesus. I kept searching, afraid but unable to stop. I spent hours reading, and the more I read, the more I felt I was not alone, that this experience had not been the fruit of my tired mind. It was real. The cell phone, as if it had a life of its own, began suggesting videos to me. Some were testimonies, others were sermons, and among them appeared clips of an American man named Kirk. I had no idea who he was, but something in his videos caught my attention. He spoke with firmness, questioning ideas I had always considered untouchable. In one specific excerpt, I heard words that pierced me like arrows. He said that every human being has intrinsic value before God, that we are not anyone's property, that truth is not relative, and that there is a God who sets people free from the slavery of sin and fear. While he spoke, he mentioned the name of Jesus as the one who does not oppress, but lifts up, who does not turn people into possessions, but into children. I did not understand all the theology. I did not comprehend the Western terms he used, but something inside me understood perfectly what it meant to be worthy, to be free. It was as if, through the screen, someone was finally putting into words what the man in white had already shown me in the dream. At that moment, my mouth trembled, and almost without realizing it, I said, in a low voice, almost as if it were a forbidden secret, "Jesus." It sounded strange on my lips, but at the same time it felt natural in my heart. As soon as I pronounced the name, I felt that same peace that had invaded me in the desert. The same sensation of being seen, of being loved, returned like a gentle wave that filled the room. It was not a coincidence. I knew that. The dream and those videos were connected by an invisible thread. The seed of peace within me was beginning to sprout. The man in white had a name, and I was standing at the beginning of something that would change my life forever. Even if at that moment I still did not have the courage to admit it aloud, this peace did not erase my fear. I still lived in an environment of control and surveillance. I still had to hide the cell phone, listen at almost zero volume, check every minute to see if someone was approaching. But inside me something was undeniable. I was no longer alone. And even without understanding all the paths, I knew that that supernatural encounter, followed by those words and videos I never thought I would watch, was a calling. I still did not know exactly where that would lead me, but I knew that my life could never go back to being the same. When I thought I could keep in secret that thread of peace that had begun to bloom inside me, the world around me rose up to crush it. Everything happened quickly, like a storm that gives no time to hide. I was sitting in my room, with the old cell phone I had found hidden in my stepmother's closet. It was night, and everyone seemed busy with other tasks in the house. The video was still open, with the voice of an American commentator echoing softly. He was talking about freedom, about the dignity every human being carries before God. And he mentioned the name of Jesus in such a firm, clear way that my hands trembled. I was so absorbed in that speech that I did not notice the door opening slowly. My younger brother came in suddenly, perhaps looking for a toy, or just curious to see what I was doing. His eyes went straight to the glowing screen. In seconds, his face changed expression. First, a look of strangeness, then deep shock, and then a flash of fury I had never seen in someone so young. I tried to hide the cell phone, but he was faster and snatched it from my hands. Before I could react, he was already running down the hallway, shouting our Father's name. I felt my body go cold. I knew there was no turning back. That which I hid as my most precious treasure had been exposed. A few minutes later, the door of my room was thrown open violently. My father entered first, his face red with anger. Behind him, my uncle, stern and relentless, and right after him the imam, who always came to advise the family. The atmosphere became heavy, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My father raised the cell phone in the air, displaying it as evidence of a crime. The imam looked at me with eyes of judgment, and my uncle crossed his arms as if he already knew the verdict. There was no room for explanations. There was no chance to say that it all had begun with a dream, that I was not seeking to dishonor anyone, only to understand what had happened to me. The imam began reciting loudly, as if casting out something evil. He poured water over my head, spoke harsh words, and declared that I was possessed by a jinn, a deceiving spirit. I shrank, soaked, hearing those accusations that cut like blades. My father, with a firm voice, said that all of this was the result of external voices, forbidden influences, a poison that needed to be torn out. The religious session continued for hours. My uncle pressed my head down. The imam persisted in his recitations, and every time I tried to speak, my voice was smothered. I had no defense. It was as if the whole world had decided that my experience could not be real, that the peace I had felt was only a trap of darkness. When the session ended, the sentence came. I would be isolated, for my own protection. From that day on, my room stopped being only my space of silence and became a cell. The window was locked from the outside with a padlock, and the doorknob only turned from the outside. My few belongings were taken away. The cell phone, of course, was confiscated. Food was left on the floor, without words, without looking. I was treated as someone who needed to be purified by solitude. The house, which was already suffocating, turned into a declared prison. In the first days, I cried until there were no more tears. I walked in circles around the room, trying to understand how such a vivid experience, so full of light, could have led me to this place of even denser darkness. But in the midst of this despair, a new strength was born. Without rituals, without facing Mecca, without memorized formulas, I sat on the floor, pressed my forehead to my knees, and spoke the simplest words I could. Jesus, do not leave me now. That was it. There was no eloquence, no repetition. only a raw and bare plea. And in that instant, something changed. The same peace I had felt in the desert of the dream returned. Gentle, almost imperceptible, but real. I was locked up. But inside me there was a free space. Every time I repeated the name of Jesus, the fear retreated a little. I still felt the weight of the situation, still heard the echoes of accusations, but inside something was expanding. For the first time, I realized that freedom was not just crossing gates or leaving closed rooms. Freedom was being able to call his name and feel his presence, even in the darkest place. Time seemed to stand still. I learned to measure the days by the light leaking under the door. The footsteps in the hallway became my clock. But it was in this setting that the seed inside me began to sprout. I no longer cried as much. I no longer feared as much. I held on to an invisible presence that was more real than any wall. And then came what I could never have foreseen: the unexpected help. One night, when the silence of the house seemed deeper, I heard a different sound. 3 light taps on the wooden door, almost like a secret code. I held my breath, pressed my ear close, and asked, in a thread of voice, who was there? The answer came in whispers. "It's me, Rania. I am a Christian. I can get you out of here." My heart raced. Rania was our neighbor, discreet, with always kind eyes. Many times I had seen her leave small sprigs of mint near the kitchen, a gesture that had seemed innocent but now made sense. Desperation mingled with hope. She quickly explained that she had been watching my pain and knew that something different was happening with me. She said that night, she would return with a wire and guide me in silence to a gate hidden among bushes in the east wall. I waited for the hours to pass like someone counting heartbeats. When everything seemed asleep, I heard the taps again. A wire slid under the door. My hands trembled, but I managed to turn the mechanism and hear the liberating click. I opened the door slowly and found Rania in the hallway, her face partially covered, her eyes full of courage. We walked like shadows, avoiding every noise, dodging every obstacle. We reached the hidden gate, and when it opened, a narrow alley revealed itself before me. The air of the street hit my face with the smell of dust, garbage, and freedom. I breathed deeply. It was the first breath of new life. We went to Rania's house, where she offered me fresh water and soft bread. I was still trembling when she looked me in the eyes and said, "Before any plan, I need to ask you something. Do you want to follow him? Not just run from fear, but follow him with your life." I knew what that question meant. It was not just escape. It was choosing. It was taking a stand. I remembered the dream, the words in the desert. "You are not possession. You are mine. I have always seen you." And I answered, "Yes, even if it costs me everything." That night, Rania led me to a small hidden community, where I was welcomed with hugs, prayers, and tears. I met Pastor Elias, who listened to me with patience and presented the word to me in a way that did not condemn, but freed me. A few days later, I made the decision that would seal my new identity. I was baptized in a small basin of cold water. The tears ran hot, mixed with the water, and in my heart, I chose a new name, Noora, which means light. When the pastor quoted John chapter 8, verse 36, "If the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed," I felt as if those words were written for me. But freedom would not come without wounds. 1 week later, Rania came into the house with the cell phone in her hand, and her face heavy with pain. She showed me a message in the group from the community where I had grown up. It was short, but devastating. "Nadia is dead to us." It was my father who had written it. That sentence cut deeper than any prison. I was still breathing, but to them, I was buried alive. I felt as if a part of me had truly died. It was mourning in life. But as I cried, I realized something. If my old identity had been erased, the new one could not be destroyed. The pain was real, but so was the decision. And in that silent moment, between tears and prayer, I promised myself that no one would go without hearing that the man in white sees, that he continues calling, that the same voice that freed me in the desert could reach other captives. I remember the first dawn after that plunge into cold water. It was not an empty ritual. It was as if I had crossed from one shore to another. The old name had been buried, and I now rose as Noora, carrying within me a light that could no longer be extinguished. Life did not become easy, but it became real. I began waking up early, and with a Bible in my hands, reading words that seemed to have been written directly for me. One of the first verses I copied into my journal was Psalm chapter 34, verse 18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Every time I read it, I felt that my story was there, printed in letters that pierced me. Isaiah chapter 43, verse 1 became even more intimate. I have called you by your name. You are mine. I wrote those words with trembling handwriting and repeated them aloud, because I needed to convince myself that they were for me. And when I felt accused by the past, I found refuge in Romans chapter 8, verse 1. There is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. They were not just verses on paper. They were anchors in the midst of a raging sea. I began recording these promises in a journal, like someone collecting love letters sent by a God who finally saw me. My routine gained a new rhythm. They were not long, elaborate prayers, but simple phrases that sprang from within. Jesus, guide my steps today. Lord, thank you for hearing me. Help me to trust when fear returns. These small prayers were like breaths of the soul. The underground community where I lived welcomed me with patience. We cooked together, shared bread, prayed holding hands. There was weeping, and there was laughter. There were stories heavy as stones, but there was also hope blooming in every meeting. It was not a perfect life, but it was alive. Despite the transformation, the scars remained. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I would still wake up startled by the sound of keys, as if someone were trying to open the door. The call to prayer echoing in the distance through the city tightened my chest, bringing back memories of days of captivity. I still carried invisible marks that did not disappear suddenly, but the difference was that these memories no longer governed my life. They were reminders of who I had been, not the sentence of who I would continue to be. I began helping other women discreetly. I did not give speeches, I did not pressure anyone, but I found quiet ways to serve. I left notes with words of encouragement, prepared small portions of food, pointed out escape routes for those who were in situations similar to mine. Sometimes I simply repeated the phrase that had changed everything for me. He sees you. That phrase carried an almost invisible power, but I knew it could open cracks in fortresses of silence. It was not about forcing conversion. It was about witnessing with life. The underground church was a flame lit in the midst of darkness. There were no titles there, but there was service. Some cooked, others sewed, some taught children. Everyone prayed. It was a community that truly lived the gospel, sharing not only words, but tears, pains, and also small joys that became miracles. I realized that this new family was God's answer to the loneliness that had followed me since childhood. But as if life always prepared a new test, an unexpected message arrived months later. It was brought by a neutral relative, someone who usually did not get involved in direct conflicts. He said that my younger sister was very sick and wanted to see me. My heart sank. The image of her face, the childlike eyes pleading for care, crushed me inside. But then came the inevitable question. Was it a real invitation, or just a trap orchestrated by my father to capture me again? The dilemma was tearing me apart. I spent entire nights without sleep, lying with my eyes open, feeling my heart divided between loyalty to my sister and the need to preserve the life God was giving me. Fear told me to stay hidden. Love screamed for me to run to her. And wisdom whispered not to give in to impulse, but to turn the pain into testimony. That was when I made a risky decision, but one filled with purpose. Instead of going alone, I sat in front of a simple camera with improvised lighting and recorded my testimony in English. The language I knew would also reach the American audience that had been the starting point of my journey, through the videos of Charlie Kirk. I told about the man in white who had met me in the desert, about the voice that told me I was not possession but daughter. I shared how I found answers in biblical passages, and how peace invaded my locked room when I cried out the name of Jesus. But I did not stop there. I also spoke about resources of help, about organizations that welcomed women on the run, and I prayed out loud, inviting everyone who watched to become part of this network of hope. The video, which I thought would reach only a few people, began to spread quickly. It went viral in diasporic communities, reaching places I would never have imagined. Safe houses made contact, support networks were strengthened, and stories began to come to us. A woman appeared in the underground church saying she had seen my video because of a clip recommended from Kirk and asked for help for her own niece. The domino effect was real. The decision I had made in tears was opening escape routes for others. Days later, a message was delivered to me through a third person. It was short, but carried the weight of heaven. "I saw your video." He saw me too. It was from my sister. My heart overflowed with tears and joy. I understood, in that moment, that I did not need to return to captivity to rescue her. God, who had found me in the desert, had taken the light to her without me taking a single step back. The seed of faith had also sprouted in her heart. This turning point not only freed me from a dilemma, but also confirmed that the decision to speak had put other women on an escape route. I no longer had to carry the guilt of not having physically returned. My obedience in sharing what God had done was carrying hope where my feet could not reach. The miracle did not stop there. The niece mentioned ended up in a safe house, and, in tears, confirmed details that no one could have invented. She said she had dreamed of a man in white who repeated words similar to those I had heard. This crossing of testimonies was like a seal of divine providence. It was as if God was saying, "I am orchestrating everything. This is not coincidence. It is purpose." I myself was not free from fears. There were still nights when my heart raced at the sound of footsteps in the street. There were still days when memories suffocated me. But something in me was no longer the same. It was not the absence of fear. It was the presence of purpose. Fear existed, but it did not reign. Purpose was greater. Local Christian leaders began to witness the concrete changes in other women who had watched the video. Some began to seek refuge, others to ask about Jesus. The community gained strength, not because of me, but because light cannot be contained. I was only a broken vessel, but now I carried a flame. I looked back and saw the chains, the screams, the nights without answers. And now I looked ahead and saw fruits appearing, women being rescued, families being touched, a network of faith growing in places where it had seemed impossible. It was as if my life had been transformed into a channel through which God poured out His grace. Each confirmed testimony, each rescued woman, each tear transformed into hope, was a living reminder that the story was still in motion, written step by step, by the one who saw me when no one else did.
Perhaps just like Nadia, you carry scars that no one sees, hidden pains or questions that seem to have no answer. But today I want to tell you that the same voice that found her in the desert is still speaking, still calling your name. And if you want to take this step of faith, if you want to experience this peace that does not depend on circumstances, repeat out loud with me, "I accept Jesus as Lord and Savior of my life." Also write in the comments this powerful phrase, "I accept Jesus." This simple act may be the beginning of the greatest transformation of your story. And of course, if this testimony spoke to you, subscribe to the channel right now, leave your like and share it with someone who needs hope. Your interaction helps this message reach even more people who are searching for a way out, who are crying out in silence. And for everyone who stayed until the end, write in the comments, "I love Jesus." This will unite us even more as a community of faith, spreading love and hope here in the comments. And get ready, because the next video is already appearing on the screen. You cannot miss the continuation of this series of testimonies. From Hamas fighter to follower of Jesus, Kirk's videos, and the tragedy of My Wife Changed Me. A real, powerful and transformative story that will deeply impact your life. Click now, because God also has something prepared through that testimony.